Every night on my walk home from work, I listen to true crime podcast. Even though my favorite podcast already released their episode for this week, the app said there was a new one. Excited, I hit play. It was a small town. The kind that still has mom and pop shops lining the street. The kind where everyone knows your name. But little did the residents know that they would soon be rocked by a horrible crime. I stopped at a traffic light. The red glowed in the darkness, glinting off the wet street. A black SUV sloshed by. Across from me, every blue refrigerated lights glowed from inside a corner deli. The chairs all up on their tables, feet in the air. The signal turn to walk. That chilly September evening was no different for the young students. She'd left her shift at the local store and walked back home. Except, she never made it home. Young student, a local store. Dang, this was hitting close to home. I was a part-time student at a Franklin Community College and worked at the local convenience store. And of course, I was walking home. I glanced behind me, looking at the alleyway behind Alessandro's Pizza, which was dark except for the neon light spilling from the sign. Her boyfriend reported her missing the next day. The town conducted a volunteer-led search, and after 2 days, they found something. Dread formed in my stomach, anticipating a body, but what he said next was so much worse. Washed up on the shore of Worthington Lake, they found a pair of size 9 red Converse sneakers. I stopped and looked down at my red Converse sneakers, damp from the rain. What the heck? My heart began to pound. The shoes were sent to a forensic analyst, who would compare its wear pattern to another pair of her shoes to try and determine if they belonged to the victim. A rumbling sound made me jump. I turned to see a dark SUV turning left at the intersection. Didn't I see that car a few minutes ago? Maybe it's following me, and the car passed me and disappeared into the darkness. Come on, Sarah, get a grip. Converse are popular sneakers. A little out of fashion, but still. 9 is a common woman's shoe size, and what college student doesn't have some sort of a job? What, you think you're listening to some sort of bravery of your own death? Yeah, right. After a few weeks, the results came back. The analyst was certain the shoes belonged to none other than Sarah Campbell. The blood drained from my face. Sarah Campbell. My name. What the freak? How? I didn't have the time to think. I forced myself to move. I broke into a run. The small shop had turned into a colorful blur. Searching the lake came up empty. Without a body, a crime is hard to solve. But the police didn't give up, and finally a witness came forward. Someone had seen a car parked at that lake that night. Around 2 a.m., a black SUV with the darkened windows. No. What the heck is going on? I whipped around. The street was empty. No people, no cars, no witnesses, said the little voice in the back of my mind. The one that's watched way too many true crime shows. My eyes scanned the shops, all closed. There were 6 black SUVs matching the witness description in the Franklin area. But one of them, in particular, caught Detective Nolan's eye. It belonged to John Kelly, a registered offender. Vroom. The sound was off. I almost didn't hear it over the voice of the podcast. I whipped around and there it was. two blaring white headlights behind me, coming from a black SUV. I forced my legs to pump faster. The car didn't speed up, it crawled along, slowly, taking its time. Like the driver knew he could catch me no matter what. I glanced back, trying to make him out behind the darkened windshield, but the headlights were too bright to see anything. Kelly wasn't just a registered offender. He'd been convicted of assaulting a woman he worked with, who had multiple piercings and short dark hair, just like Sarah. The car crawled along. The car crawled down the road, stalking me, like a lioness stalking her prey. I veered left into our dark residential street. Just a few more steps. Headlights flashed across me, illuminating my running shadow on the pavement. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I possibly could. The little brown house with the yellow shutters came into view. I sprinted across the grass, grabbing my keys from my pocket. Click. I threw the door open and slammed it shut behind me. Then, I turned the deadbolt, collapsing against the door, and began crying. I heard the rush of the car passing our house, continuing down the road, but I wasn't safe. Gabe wasn't home yet. I was alone in a dark house with someone driving down the street who knew exactly where I lived. Still sobbing, I checked all the locks. Then I called Gabe, who assured me he was 5 minutes away. I made my way down the dark hallway and headed into the bathroom. Then I set my phone on the counter, grabbed a clump of tissues and began to blow my nose. Click. I jumped, whipped around, but it wasn't coming from outside the door. My phone screen lit up. The podcast was still playing. I must have hit it when I put the phone down. It has skipped several minutes forward according to the play indicator. "What do you think happened to Sarah?" the baritone voice asked. I reached for it to turn it off. "Well, she told me she wanted to run away before." I stopped dead. It was Gabe's voice, clear as day, coming from the speakers. "She did? Why?" the voice asked. "She wasn't happy with her grades, her job, her parents. She told me sometimes she dreamed of just moving on some random state and leaving it all behind." I froze, staring at the mirror. I never said that. Never. Gabe was lying? I mean, that was hurtful to me as her boyfriend, you know? I thought we were just going to get married someday, but apparently she didn't feel the same way. My heart pounded in my ears. "So you think she just skipped town and is happily living her life somewhere else, rather than being abducted or murdered?" I paused. "Yes, that's exactly what I think." That's all for now. Thank you to our listeners. The outro played. I stared at my reflection, everything coming down all at once, my mind trying to race and catch up with what it meant. The front door creaked open. Footsteps sounded outside. "Sarah, I'm back." I backed away from the door. "Sarah?" My eyes fell on the window. I ran over to it, turned the lock. Push. I popped the screen out. Then I swung a leg over, pulled myself through the window, and ran as fast as I could. When you lose a child, the therapists say all kinds of things about the grieving process. You'll search for any reason to blame yourself. You'll play the last moments in your head on repeat. You'll go numb for months on end. But there's one thing my grief counselor never told me. She never said anything about the noise. None of the books talked about it either. The giggles and coughs and creaking of doors, The bouncing of cupboards and the clinking of toys, or the sounds a child fills a home with, vanish in a breath. The silence that remains bears down you like smoke. It suffocates you. Sometimes it kills you. And then, one day, as you drift like a wrath down the empty halls of your home, a sound rings out in the quiet. Sometimes it's a sniffle. Sometimes it's a little footstep. Your brain dismisses the noise because it's so familiar, so commonplace. Then, reality catches up and reminds you that your child is gone. I was in bed the first time it happened. A faint yawn stirred me up from my sleep. I ignored it and rolled over, knowing it was just Sophie in her room nearby. A few seconds later, I jolted upright, trying to remember if the hell I'd been living was all a dream. Trying to remember if my daughter was really just down the hall. It doesn't matter how much time passes. I always hear the noises, and the realization is always the same. Sophie is gone, and she's never coming back. Some part of my brain just can't let her go, and fills the vacuum of her absence with fleeting signs of life. I've been trapped in this house with a head full of ghosts for half a year now. At first, I heard the noises only as I went about my day, but as soon as they began to spill into my dreams, I'd sometimes be woken up by her laughter or by my own cries as I tore her through the woods in search of her. With the passage of time, I began dreaming of something worse. It's not the one where I find out she ran away on purpose, or the one where the cops tell me they found a dead body. It's darker, more sinister. Something comes out of the woods towards my house. It comes at night and looks up at the windows. I always know what it wants. In some dreams, it stands outside my daughter's room and calls to her in a raspy voice. I watch her open the window and vanish into the freezing dark. I never actually see the thing. I always scream myself awake the moment it turns to look at me. I'm afraid to sleep. I spend almost no time in my bedroom. Instead, I try to nap in the living room with music playing, or I try to get work done in the downstairs office. Then, a week ago, I heard it while I was awake. A strange noise somewhere outside. It crackled like a branch snapping or fence breaking. I grabbed a flashlight and my father's old car and stepped out into the cold. My property spans a few acres, and the far end of the yard backs up against thick woods. A while back, an old couple driving home from church claimed they'd seen a girl matching Sophie's description. They saw her walking towards the forest, but nothing ever turned up. I circled my house, but I couldn't locate the source of the noises. It happened again for 3 consecutive nights. On the last, I was ready for it. I threw the back door open the moment the crackling arose. There, at the edge of the woods, something lurched between the trees and receded into the darkness. Sleep barely came at all after that. My mind kept tying the wicked dreams to what was happening outside, and soon I came to believe that whoever or whatever was visiting my home wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Last night, my visitor returned. I watched it from the window in the upstairs hall. I saw it emerge from the murky woods and move across the field beneath a pale moon. The thing didn't walk with the familiar rhythm of a biped. Instead, it skittered, transferring its weight fluidly from the indiscernible limb to another, or occasionally rolling and diving like tumbleweed All the while, its pallid head bobbed around on a contorted neck, studying everything, or nothing at all. The creature made its way around my house, touching and tapping and scratching on doors and windows, looking for a way in. I scrambled for the knife, and just as I did, there was a knock on the front door. It was a polite but purposeful knock, and had I not seen the hideous thing outside moments before, I'd have been certain it was a neighbor checking in on me. I stood there at the top of the stairs in the darkness of my home, gazing down at the front door as the knocks repeated in threes. My body went stiff, and the longer I froze there, the more intense the knocking grew. Soon, the thing outside pounded and scratched at my door with such force that the dreadful sounds echoed through every inch of the house. The creature issued desperate groans and rattled the knob, swelling with rage each passing moment. At last, I regained control of myself and snuck down the stairs, crowbar in hand, ready to shred this thing to bits if it came inside. The old door reached the end of its integrity and split apart, revealing a sight so gruesome I nearly vomited. My eyes perceived the being's parts, but my brain couldn't compose them into a familiar object. Snarls of rooted wood and bone, hanging scraps of flesh, ropes and a vine and stick, red muscle that twitched and rippled as the monster breached my entryway. The hulking mass rushed towards me, wet feet slapping the hardwood floor and leaving trails of soil and blood. I tried to scream as the thing seized me up in its grip and studied me. I tried to slice at it, but it clamped down on my arm with breathtaking strength. It yanked me close to its dry and shallow face, and I imagined the head might have been stolen from a near fresh corpse. The thing peered down into my soul with lidless eyes that screamed in terror, as if witnessing to something even more ghastly than itself. It mumbled something to me, something wet and guttural, and my gaze fell on the crown jewel of its horrors. A set of ragged, gory lips stretched over 100 mismatched teeth. What looked like fishing lines snaked its way throughout the maw, sewing with cruel hands. Pulled taut to imprison the face in an eternal grimace. The room went sideways and my back slammed against the floor. The ceiling flew past and gave way to a starry sky. Wet grass licked my skin. My screams filled the night air and reverberated all around me. I hacked and slashed at its putrid hand, but the creature never stopped dragging me towards the woods. I knew death awaited, and soon the shadows swallowed me up. Pitiful groans echoed in the forest all around me, but they weren't mine. They came from a man in terrible pain, and the image of a half-eaten person crawling around the leaves appeared in my mind's eye. I was probably next. The moans grew louder and louder until finally my captor snatched me off of the ground and stood me upright, gripping my head in its scarred hands to show me something. A naked man, near dead, bound to a tree with a net of roots and vines. "Mark?" I said in disbelief. I knew this man. He lived a few miles up the road, and we always ran into each other down at the general store. He even knew my kid. "Oh God," he sobbed. He wasn't relieved to see me. In fact, he hid his eyes as much as he could. Mark had taken a brutal beating. Purple and black welts covered his face, and lacerations in varying depth crisscrossed his body. Dried blood caked his form like war paint. Who knows how long he'd been held captive. The creature pressed its rotten face against my ear and mumbled something indecipherable. It let me go and lurched towards a wounded man, growling through its jagged teeth. Mark wailed for mercy, but the creature would give him none. It grabbed his throat and squeezed until Mark's eye bulged wide open, and then it pointed a long, crooked finger in my direction. "Yes," Mark cried, between shallow breaths. "Yes, okay, it was me. It was me, Felix." The creature watched me, awaiting my reaction, but Mark's words locked me down as tightly as the roots that held him. Memories of my daughter flooded my thoughts like a drug, fast and warm, taking my mind far away from the gloomy woods we stood in. "I told her to follow me," he continued. I tricked her. I'm sick, Felix. I've been messed up so long, 'cause of my old man. I can feel him in me, making me ugly." The image of little Sophie laughing and playing and holding my hand sped up. They drifted by faster and faster until they all blurred into each other, from the day she was born through saying goodbye to her mom in the hospital to the last time I saw her get on the school bus at the end of the road. My mind raced over the memory of me arriving just a few minutes late that evening. The bus was already gone, and so was my daughter. A long moment passed. The creature never tore its dead gaze from me. Then, the only words I could find came slinging out of my mouth in a meek whisper. "She trusted you." Hearing those words out loud ignited hellfire inside me. My reason evaporated and inevitable hatred settled over me like a fog that snaked between the trees. I charged at Mark, Kabar in death grip. I wanted to bury it in the mouth he spoke to my child with. But before I could reach him, the creature intercepted me and stopped me dead in my tracks. It pried the knife from my hand and flung it into the woods. It peered into my eyes. I stared into a face transformed by death, and yet I could see it come alive with sorrow. It looked as revolted as I felt. What this being knew of human ethics was insurmountable, but it seemed to understand the situation in a natural context. The man was a predator, and my little girl was a prey. And it seemed to detect that this sort of hunting was not the normal order of things. The man wasn't hunting to eat, but rather to satiate a darker sort of hunger. The creature released me and pointed to a nearby tree. At its base lay a white bedsheet, likely taken from the clothesline of a nearby farmhouse. My eyes moved over to the contours of its surface, tracing the gentle features of a child's body. My heart collapsed into a black hole. My chest nearly caved in with it. At this time, I had said it worse to have a missing child dead. All this time, I had said it worse to have a missing child than a dead one, because in death at least you have an answer. But the moment Sophie's shape registered in my head, I'd have been given anything for to go back to being a question mark. The creature pointed back the way we had come, back to my home. Then it reached up to a torn face. It tore at the wire that had sealed its mouth and snarled when the ragged lips came free. It returned to Mark and grabbed his throat as it had before, but this time it thrust its face against his. Horrified shrieks rang out in the woods, followed by the sickening sounds of flesh splitting away. It looked back at me, gagging on the tongue it had just stolen from the man, until finally the appendage slipped into place. The creature then said, "Leave." I ignored the lightning bolt of pain that arched between my head and chest, and scooped up Sophie's remains, bedsheet swaddling her in tiny form. Mark's howls followed me to the edge of the woods, then cut out abruptly as I stepped into the field. The walk home was a solemn one, guided by the fire of a crescent sun. I broke ground just beneath my bedroom window and dug into the daylight, reached the western hills. By the time I patted the last heap of dirt into the Sophie's resting place, the shadows had vanished from the edge of the woods. Spire one. It loomed for just a while, then receded, never to darken my field again. In time, the sounds that had once haunted me receded too, and I could finally grieve in peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you guys enjoyed this story for today. Now, huge thanks to the Cold People for contributing to this story. And I really love the story I narrated today. So thank you very much, and keep making awesome content. Now, as always, I'll see you guys in the next story. And as always, don't forget to sit back, relax, and indulge in fear.